Right behind me, right back here, that's the poker room at the Bellagio on the Las Vegas Strip. And if you were to look just over here, right here, see that room within a room back there? That is the world famous Bobby's Room, the inner sanctum of the Bellagio poker room. That's where the high stakes, the highest of high stakes games are played here at the Bellagio. Doyle Brunson, Chip Reese, Phil Ivey, Daniel Negreanu, absolute legends of the game play the highest of stakes in that room. And today, I'll be playing with none of those guys. But today, I'm gonna be playing inside Bobby's Room here at the Bellagio. All right, I'd be lying if I said this wasn't a bit of a bucket list item. This is kind of cool. This is gonna be the first time for me personally, and of course the first time on the vlog, that I've played inside Bobby's Room. As mentioned, very legendary poker venue here right in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip. Tons of history gone down inside this room. It's amazing. All these years playing poker in Las Vegas, all these years making vlogs here on YouTube, and this will be the first time that I've played inside Bobby's Room.
Up at the cage, we hand over one pack of $10,000 in cash. That's how much we're gonna buy into this game for. This game is gonna be played as $25.50 with a $50 big blind ante. So $125 in the middle before anything happens, pre-flop. There's a couple of familiar faces in this game. On my direct left is none other than Brad Owen. You guys are very familiar with him. A few spots over to my right is my good buddy Benton Blakeman. He's the head coach of the Hand History Lounge. Great spot to get some group coaching, get some feedback on hands that you've played. All right, let's put this 10K to work and get in there. In this hand, there's an early position raised to $125, and the button makes the call. We look down at a pocket pair, the threes in the small blind. We're gonna make this call, and Brad calls in the big blind. So we got ourselves a multi-way flop here, heading to the King 8-5, all spades. Not exactly what we had in mind. I check it, Brad checks it, initial raiser checks it, and action checks around, and we see exactly what we had in mind on the turn. Seeing no interest in this pot so far, chances of someone having a flush pretty low. Time to bet for value. Fire out for $350. Brad folds, initial raiser folds, and the button folds. So, not exactly a big pot here with a set, but a pot nonetheless. Every pot counts with you playing for these stakes. Let's drag it in and see if we can get some momentum. In this hand, the cutoff comes in for the raise up to $200. We're on the button, looking down at the ace-jack offsuit. Could flat call, or we could 3-bet. Think both options are pretty reasonable. Let's go ahead and 3-bet though. Let's take the initiative here, bump this one up to $700 in position. Gives us a couple of extra possibilities post-flop. The blinds get out of the way, and the initial raiser makes the call. So heads up to a flop here. It comes down ace-9-7, 2 spades. Good for top pair, reasonable kicker. My opponent checks it over to me. I think we're gonna be c-betting on an ace-high board a lot of the time when we have top pair. Let's go ahead and do that. I fire out for $600, and my opponent lets it go. Again, not a big pot here, but $700 pre-flop plus the blinds, it's almost $1,000 in profit right away. Can't really complain about any victory in these stakes. All right, in this next hand, my buddy Benton comes in for the raise up to $150 out of the cutoff. Small blind makes the call. We've got King 9 offsuit in the big blinds. Obviously not a beautiful hand, but getting a very good price here with that ante out there. Toss in the extra hundo, and let's see a flop. Ace-9-4 with 2 clubs, and one of those clubs being the ace of clubs. Kind of an interesting board here, and I'll mention why in just a little bit. But back to the flop action, as small blind checks, I check, and Benton fires out for a $400 c-bet. Player in the small blind makes the call, and we've got the king of clubs in our hand to go along with middle pair. I don't think Benton necessarily needs to be weighted to an ace the entire time, and I think the small blind can make the call with any pair. So while we can certainly be behind in this spot a fair amount of the time, I think it's worth a call here, see what develops on future streets. So I toss in the call, and we are still 3 ways to the 8 of clubs on the turn, which is pretty interesting because we've got the king of clubs in our hand. That's the nut flush blocker now. Small blind checks it, and I think we want to start turning our hand into a bluff here. As mentioned, we could still have the best hand here, so maybe it's not completely necessary, but just in case, why not take the initiative and make things interesting here? Those are my thoughts when I bet out for $500 here, and we see a pretty quick fold from Benton. So far, so good, but the player in the small blind makes the call. So heads up to a river card, which pairs the 4, offsuit 4 on the river. Now the small blind hops out of flow here on this card and he leads out for $1,800. Definitely not loving this kind of a line. It is pretty interesting though, because we do have blockers to all of the strongest hands. The king of clubs in our hand, as well as a 9, blocks both flushes and full houses. But I don't see what he could really be bluffing with here. Since we got those key cards, we also have cards that remove a lot of his bluffs, especially that king of clubs. So I think I just weight him in this instance a little bit more heavily towards the flushes. Don't know if he's gonna have a 4 all that often. Check calling 2 streets with that. It just feels a little bit too light to call down here with. Maybe there's some real adventurous things we could do, pull the trigger with an all-in wager, but I just don't have it in me in this spot and I decide to let it go. All right, in this hand, we've got a blind versus blind battle as the small blind limps in and we look down at 9-7 of hearts in the big blinds. Certainly want to raise some suited connectors and gapper type hands into our raising range. So let's go ahead and bump this up to $200 in position out of the big blind. And the small blind makes the call. Same player as the last hand, and the two of us go heads up to the ace, jack 10, 2 club flop, which not exactly what we had in mind, but probably pretty good for our range. Small blind checks it. Let's go ahead and represent that range. I fire out for $200 and the small blind makes the call. Turn pretty interesting. It's the 9 of clubs giving us a pair, putting 3 clubs on the board now. Front door flush possible. Small blind checks it over to me and I don't think we want to take this 9 to showdown. Doesn't feel like that's going to win all that often. And if that's the case, I think we want to continue telling a story here, make it consistent all the way through the river. So let's fire again here. Don't need to go too big. And I fire out for $250, expecting my opponent to fold almost never, maybe once in a while, but have plans for the final street. And sure enough, my opponent calls and we head to the river, which is an offsuit queen. 4 to a straight, 3 to a flush, and I'm almost certain my pair of 9s is not going to be good here. So when my opponent checks it over, let's go for it. Let's size up a little bit. Don't need to go too crazy. If he's got 2 pair here, it's going to be pretty tough to call down with that kind of a hand. If he's got a king, he's probably going to call down a lot. So I'm just hoping he doesn't have that and we can fold almost any other holding. So I assemble some black chips and fire out 9 of them into the middle, good for a $900 bet. My opponent thinks about it for a decent little while here before making the fold. So that feels like a pretty good result here. Never have the best hand here, but managed to find the win. All right, and this next hand action folds over to us on the dealer button, and we look down at the queen 9 of diamonds. Extremely raisable on the button here. Go ahead and raise it up to $150. Brad in the small blind gets out of the way, and action over to my buddy Varun. He's in the big blinds, and he makes a 3-bet up to $500. Queen 9 of diamonds in position. You're gonna have to pry these cards from my cold dead hand. So I make the call, and we go heads up to a flop, which comes down king, queen 6, rainbow with 1 diamond. Middle pair, backdoor flush draw. That is definitely going to be good enough to call a $500 C bet. We're going to need to see at least 1 more card. So I toss in the call and we're off to a turn card, which is the 4 of hearts, 2nd heart. Big blind now checks it over to me. We've got ourselves plenty of showdown value, I would imagine. So I don't think we need to go ahead and start turning this into a bluff or necessarily betting for value. That leaves one option. I decide to check it back. River looks much more pretty though in my eyes. River comes down an offsuit queen, upgrading us to trips. Pretty interesting though is that the big blind starts assembling chips and it's no small wager. Comes up with a number of $1,700 firing out into us. Trips feels like a pretty damn good hand to me. Are there reasons to find a raise here? I think versus that size, probably not. I think if you bet smaller, maybe more of a blocker-ish type of a bet. Definitely want to go for more value versus that kind of a bet. This is about 85% pot or something. Math not exactly my strong suit, but I do know that it's not a small wager. So I think with trips, medium kicker versus that bet size, we've got ourselves a pretty easy call here. Toss it in, and the big blind shows us bad news. He shows us the ace queen. So not exactly as good of a river as we once thought. That is a little bit of a cooler situation. Don't know if we could have done anything else differently in this spot. Pretty sure not. And we lose some money trickling back down into Stuckville. Very disappointing. When you're playing a bigger game, you just need some good things to happen, some cards to fall your way. You want to have the trips with the higher kicker versus the other trips. Not exactly how you envision it. Decide to add on here for another $3,000, and we are now in for a total of $15,000 into this game. Looking for some good things to happen, trying to find that elusive run good. All right, in this next hand, the button comes in for the raise up to $125. The player in the small blind puts in the 3-bet, $425, and we're in the big blind looking down at 10-9 of hearts. We definitely want to try and play in position here. Player in the small blind, not exactly the grinder type. Not exactly sure how he's going to be structuring his 3-bet range and all that stuff, but have to think that he's probably weighted a little bit more strong than average small blind versus button. Those are my thoughts anyway. The downside to doing what I'm about to do, though, is that we become extremely capped. But I decided to put in the cold call out of the big blind. Don't want to bloat this pot too much, expecting that little bit stronger of a range out of the small blind. But we get some good news when the button makes the fold. So we do get to play in ultimate blast position here in this spot. So heads up to a flop that comes down 10-4 deuce rainbow. That's good for top pair. My opponent checks it over to me. Kind of interesting here. We do have top pair, but as mentioned, my opponent, I think, weighted a little bit stronger on average. I think we benefit from some protection and some equity denial, all that fancy terminology type stuff. So let's put out a smallish bet here, fire out for $350. I could do this with pocket jacks, pocket tens. Maybe I'll trap sometimes, but I'll also fire out for a small wager sometimes. All that balance type stuff, all that stuff that may or may not matter, but what does matter is that my opponent makes the call. Head to a river, which is not my favorite card. It's an offsuit ace. Not sure if we're beating too much now, so when my opponent checks it over to me, I think we have a pretty straightforward check back here. But the river card definitely makes me feel a little better, as it's another ace. Things get pretty interesting though when my opponent in the small blind now fires out for 2 yellow chips. That's $2,000 in cold, hard United States cash. So not an easy spot here, mainly because I'm not sure if he would pick this sizing with a hand like pocket jacks, pocket queens, pocket kings. And it means that he's basically representing an ace and not too much else. With 2 of those aces on board, it makes it less likely that he has one, and he would also have to just check call with ace high. The thing is though, I didn't bet all that big on the flop, so perhaps that is possible. However, let's say he had a hand like king queen, queen jack suited, something along those lines. I think my bet on the flop was small enough to keep a lot of those hands in there. Now, would he check call with those type of hands rather than c-bet? Again, not exactly sure. This is my first time playing with this opponent, and I think you could flip a coin with all those conflicting factors going on. Do we want to just find the hero fold here? I mean, I don't know if it's a hero fold facing a $2,000 bet, but it is the best pair on the board. And again, I feel like we beat everything other than an ace here. So there's a lot going on in my mind in this spot, and I think about it for quite some time. But I eventually grab the 2 yellow chips out of my stack and match his bets, toss those into the middle, and he rolls over the ace king, which is very disappointing in this spot. Win some, lose some, lose some seems to be the nature of this game so far. My pre-flop read was pretty right. He was weighted a little bit stronger here. I think we put in that 4-bet. It's not going to work out so well for us no matter what. He's definitely not folding pre-flop, and he might peel post-flop at least for one street. So I think there was no great line for us to find other than maybe finding the hero fold here on the river. Doesn't feel great, to be honest with you guys. Decide, though, to muster up the strength. Let's add more money onto this stack. We add an additional $4,000, which puts us into this game for $19,000. Wish I could say we had that much money in our stack in front of us, but we do not. We have ourselves a little under $9,000 to work with here. Looking for some favorable flops and situations, you guys. All right, let's see what we can find here. As the under the gun player comes in for the raise up to $125, there's one call before the player in the cutoff puts in a 3-bet up to $425, and we're on his direct left on the button, looking down at a much needed sight, the pocket aces, in a hand that's been 3-bet before it's even been gotten to us, the actual dream. Don't want to just cold call here because we let in the initial raiser and the initial caller for too good of a price. Don't want to go too big though because we don't want to scare off all of our action. That leads me to a middling type of size. We definitely want to go smaller for our 4-bets in position. Let's make it $1,100 with our pocket aces here on the button. Player in the under the gun spot does not release right away. Obviously, we are begging for the action here. He's a good player here. He's going to recognize that maybe we'll have some bluffs here, but we're really just hoping that his hand is going to be forced and we're in a cooler type spot. Eventually, the player in the under the gun spot delivers the fantastic news when he goes ahead and jams all in. He's got about $5,000 in his stack. The initial caller and the player in the cutoff, they get out of the way, and of course, we just roll over our hand. We've got the goods, and this is the kind of spot we've been waiting for. The kind of spot that you dream about, thinking about playing in Bobby's room at the Bellagio, waking up with the pocket aces and getting it all in pre-flop. He asked if we want to go once or twice. Normally I would just want to go once for the content, but since I'm more of a guest, I would say, in this game, it's my first time, I just say whatever you guys normally do in this game. And he decides he would like to run it twice. So we are off to see 2 full boards, and the first board runs out looking fairly clean to me. On the second flop, though, we see 2 kings hit the board. Not good if he has ace king or pocket kings, but if he has other pairs, we're okay. However, we're almost certainly okay when the turn comes down in ace. So unless he has pocket kings here, we've got the nuts on this second board as well. And my opponent flashes the ace king, which is good briefly there on the second board, but we're able to find the one outer, the last ace on the turn there, to go ahead and scoop this 5-figure pot in. Again, a very much needed pot, and just what you're hoping for as you're playing a bigger game. Does end up being the cooler situation for the under the gun spot, finding the ace king and not all that deep of a situation. 100 big blinds, obviously can't blame him for that. But as mentioned, very much needed here. Moves us in the desired direction on a $14,700 stack at this point. Still in stuck bill, but considerably less so. Alright, in this game, at every dealer change, which happens every half an hour, there is a bomb pot for $200 a person. Typically, that's going to put $1,600 into the middle, and this hand is a very interesting bomb pot. As we look down at pocket queens in this hand, flop comes down Jack 8 deuce with 2 spades and action checks to me in the hijack. I think we want to go ahead and start wagering some money, see what happens here. We could probably evacuate on the flop if it goes raise, re-raise, or something crazy like that. Ranges are 100% in this spot, so one pair type holdings can be kind of tricky, but let's see what happens here. What happens is the big blind makes the call and the middle position player makes the call as well. So we head to a turn card, which looks pretty damn nice to me. It's an offsuit queen, upgrading us to top set. Aside from the 10-9 straight draw, we have the nuts here. So when action checks over to me again, I don't think we want to just check this one back because there is a potential flush draw out there. And if we do happen to be up against a straight, well, at least we have outs. So after they check, I fire out for $600 here, which I think is maybe on the small side, but also kind of reasonable considering it's 3 ways and one of the draws does get there. And not only does one of the draws get there, but the big blind is going to go ahead and represent that hand. He goes ahead and check raises to $2,300 before the middle position player gets out of the way. Over to us now. We have no choice here, nothing else to do other than make the call here. And we are very much looking for a board pairing river card, which does not come, unfortunately. It's an offsuit 7. Sizable wager incoming here in this spot from the big blind, who fires out for $6,500. This is not a fun spot, my friends. He's basically representing the straight, and that is it. If he flopped a set, he's going to find the check raise on that street. It's very unlikely that he turned to pair queen jack, considering there's only one queen left. And from there, it's just a matter of whether he's going to be able to find a bluff here with a hand like jack 10 or jack 9. I think those are going to be the 2 most likely holdings because, again, we have so much removal to the queen X hands. Don't think he's going to call with 8-9 or 8-10 on the flop. Just second pair being out of position. That seems a little bit unlikely. So there's really not that many bluffs, but it's a very narrow range that he's representing. It's, again, one of those tough spots here when you're playing for a gigantic sum. You don't really want to be in these kind of spots. Why can't it just be easy poker? You know, when you play a bigger game, easy poker, is that so much to ask for? Apparently it is today, and I decided that this player, he's a good player. Is he that creative? Is he going to find a check raise bluff on the turn there with another player to act who could also have that hand that he's representing? I decide probably not. It's never fun folding a set here, especially top set, but decide to let this one go. My opponent, he's one who likes to show down bluffs. I've seen him do it before, and we're just praying we do not get a bluff shown in our face, and thankfully we do not. He does not show the goods. He slides those cards into the muck. Makes me feel a little bit better about the fold, but that is not very fun. Would love to just go back in time, check back on the turn, get a much cheaper showdown on the river, but it's just not to be. All right, guys, when all else fails, you know what I recommend? I recommend getting aces, okay? Get aces. That's what I do here, the black ace variety. Go ahead and raise this one up to $150. My buddy Varun, he finds a 3-bet here. Obviously love to see it. He goes ahead, 3-bets this up to $500. Back over to us. Is calling a 3-bet on a position with pocket aces a reasonable way to play poker? I don't think so, guys. It's 4-bet time. Let's do that up to $1,500, which my opponent calls. All good so far, and the flop comes down 7-3 deuce, 2 spades, 1 club. Barring ace-high boards, that's got to be one of the safest flops we could ask for in a 4-bet pot. I don't think our opponents are going to be having too many 7s or 3s or 2s in their hand. Happy to c-bet this, do so for a small sizing in 4-bet pots. I go ahead and fire out for $800. Before we get some interesting news, my opponent, he goes ahead and raises up to $2,000. Really don't mind this at all. It is a little bit tricky being out of position here. I think a lot of times opponents will do this when they have an overpair. They kind of want to slow down the action, and they find a way to do that with a raise. So it can feel pretty natural to go ahead and call this raise and then check to my opponent on the turn. A lot of times I think that'll slow down the action too much. So I have some other ideas in mind. I'm gonna go ahead, call this bet, head to a turn card, which is the 10 of clubs, putting 2 flush draws on board now. And as mentioned, I don't want the turn to just go check, check. Let's go ahead, fire out, take a non-standard line here, fire out for $1,500 here on the turn. Interesting news is that my opponent, he wants to play for more money still. He puts in the raise up to $4,000 now, and if we happen to be up against pocket 10s or the unexpected pocket 2s or 3s or 7s, then so be it, but we are taking these aces all the way for sure. Let's go ahead, fire the rest of the money in there. I only have another $3,500 beyond his 4K raise, so we are shipping all the money in, $7,500 all in. Very good news comes when our opponent does not immediately snap call. Gives us the sigh, which lets us know we definitely have the best hand. He asks if we can run it twice if he calls. This is not a full-time player, not a grinder, and I say, sure, absolutely we can do that. Upon hearing that news, he goes ahead and sticks the rest of the money in there. So we do not know what we are up against in this spot, but we're off to see 2 river cards. Those river cards get dealt out, and we show down the goods, and the pocket aces remain the best hand from pre-flop through rivers, and we're going to drag a very nice size pot here. Much needed. Win all else fails, you guys. Aces to the rescue. Couldn't come soon enough. That gets us all the way unstuck into Profitville. Just a smidge. Sitting on just around a 20K stack here, maybe around $21,000 in front of us, but that represents profit, and that feels very good. All right, time to put some of that profit to work as we look down at King Queen suited for middle position. Happily raise this up to 150, and the player in the cutoff makes the call. So heads up to a flop that comes down Queen 10-3 with 2 diamonds, good for top pair. Being out of position on non-ace high boards, I'm gonna do a lot of checking. So I go ahead and do that here. My opponent fires out for $300. Doesn't feel quite strong enough to find a check raise here, so let's make the call. Head to a river where we see an offsuit 9. Check it to my opponent again, who now finds a check. So we head to a river, which is the 7 of diamonds. Multiple draws have now completed. Couple of options. Could check and see what my opponent does, or we could fire on the small-ish side. I like that route. Let's fire out some money. I bet $350, and my opponent pretty quickly calls. We roll it over though, and we are good. Feels good to have a little bit of momentum on our side. All right, this next hand is a special one for sure. In this one, we see the hijack coming in for the raise up to $150. This player joined the game much later. Again, it's somebody that I've never played with before, and I have no info on at this point. So after he comes in for the raise, we see the player in the cutoff make the call, and we look down at the ace king offsuit in the big blind. That's a 3-bet, my friends. Let's go ahead, bump this one up to $700. Hijack decides that's an appropriate price, as does the player in the cutoff. So we go 3 ways here to a flop that comes down King Jack 9 with 2 diamonds. Obviously flopping top pair, top kicker is great, but the board's pretty connected here, so decent chance that connects somewhat at least with our opponent's ranges. Being out of position versus 2 of those ranges, I decide to check it here. Player in the hijack does not check it. He fires out for $500. That folds out the player in the cutoff, and it's over to us with a very straightforward call. Chuck in the $500, and we head to a river, which pairs the 9. Check it again to my opponent in the hijack, who does not stop firing, and this time it's for no small amount, $2,000 is the bet here. The flop bet was a very comfortable check call. This one definitely not so much. We're never going to be folding here for this second bet, but some alarm bells are definitely starting to go off here. Could he be firing out with king queen? Since I don't know my opponent, I guess that is possible. Not sure if he would do that for this size, but definitely can't discount it. So if we can beat some value hands, we definitely have a call here. I grab the 2 yellow chips and toss those into the middle. Pot is becoming sizable as we head to the river card, which is a brick. Check it to my opponent here, kind of hoping to just get to showdown here with our top pair, but my opponent does not oblige. This time grabs even more yellow chips, 5 of them this time, and tosses out the wager for $5,000. This is not a fun spot. As mentioned, I don't know my opponent at all. This $5,000 wager represents 2 times the size of a max buy-in in the 5-10 game. And this is just one bet. At this point, we have a pure bluff catcher. We know that my opponent would not be value betting king queen here, not for this size. So that removes all of the hands that we could beat for value. Losing to king jack, pocket jacks, pocket nines, jack 9 suited, king 9 suited, as well as the queen 10 suited for the flop straight. Don't think he's going to be taking a hand like jack 10 or queen jack and turning that into a bluff across multiple streets. Just seems unlikely. That leaves the diamond draws that do brick out, and we do not have any removal to those holdings. But how often are you going to find an opponent who empties the clip in a multi-way pot on the flop, starts betting on that street, and just fires across all 3 streets? That's my thinking as I decide to make the exploitive hero fold here with my ace king. And normally I don't ask my opponents to show down their holdings, and especially not for a fee, but we're making a vlog here. We need the final chapter. We need the final info to complete the story here. So I ask my opponent how much to show, and he says, "What are you offering?" I say $50 to show, and he says, "How about 100?" I meet him in the middle and I say 75. He accepts the deal, which I now kind of wish that he did not accept, because it is the ultimate max pain in this spot. Not only do we not make the correct call on the river, we do not drag this pot, but we lose an additional $75, getting to feel the maximum pain as he shows us the ace 3 of diamonds. Oh, that is going to sting. That is going to sit with me for a while, because it would have been a gigantic pot to win towards the end of this session. It is a defining hand. I give this guy way too much credit. Throw away top pair, top kicker on a board that somewhat bricks out, which is probably not great poker on my part, and that one feels miserable. All right, so we pick up the pieces as there's a little bit more poker left, and in this hand we see a raise from the under the gun spot up to 150. There's 2 callers, and we look down at a premium in the big blind, looking down at pocket queens. We're gonna go ahead and 3-bet this, of course. We make it $800 to go. Back over to the player in the under the gun spot who came in for the initial raise, who thinks for a long time before tank folding. The same player as that previous hand, he's next to act, and he does not like folding. Clearly, he goes ahead and he makes the call. Player behind him in the cutoff makes the fold. So once again, we're up against this same player, heads up to the 8-4 deuce rainbow. Obviously a pretty good flop for the queens, but our guy is very aggressive, as we've come to learn. So I decided to slip it to him, check it over to my man, who fires out once again for a yellow chip, this time $1,000. Obviously going nowhere with queens, make the call, and we head to the river, which comes down a king. Check it over to my opponent, who now checks it back. River is a 5. Could do a couple of things here. Could fire out for a small blocker type bet, or we could check it once again versus an aggressive opponent. That seems fine. I decided to check it, but he once again checks it back, and we roll it over, expecting to win pretty much always, which is the case here. Drag this one in versus his pocket 3s. Maybe if we put a very tiny bet on the river, he'll shrug and call that, but don't think we missed too much value there on later streets. But of course, we miss all of the value in making the call there on the river with our ace king. That one, as mentioned, is going to be one that sits with me for a while and is a very defining hand in this session. Well, it is a wrap on session number 1 from Bobby's room here at the Bellagio, and obviously it's not the results that I was looking for.
I think I'm okay with that set of queens fold. I know it's not very fun to watch a man fold top set. I know that's not what you guys tune in for, but I do feel okay about that one. Obviously, I don't feel super great about the fold with ace king after under-repping my hand post flop. I think the thought process was fine in the moment, especially not having any history with that player. But it would have made such a massive difference in the session. Would have booked a nice win. Just that one hand would have made all the difference. But you know, sometimes the stakes get uncomfortable, and I've definitely played games that are bigger than this one, especially at Lodge Card Club, where we've played 5,100, 200, 400, you know, et cetera, and had some bigger swings than this one by far. But you know, when you're not playing these kinds of stakes all the time, the money still means something to me for sure. And $5,000 river bet, it's no joke to me. So wasn't able to find the call in that spot, but we'll get additional opportunities. And I'm definitely going to be playing games as big or bigger than this one in the near future. So if you want to ride along, I would love it if you would subscribe to the channel. See if we can get them next time.